What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another episode of the 415ers podcast. Evan Giddings, Marc Grandy with you as always. Odyssey Sports Podcast Network 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with 95.7 The Game. Marc, my man, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Evan. Maybe not as well as Jimmy Garoppolo is today. I mean, he's still got a foot injury. But the good news for Jimmy Garoppolo is it's not season-ending, potentially. He doesn't need surgery. So in a bad week for Jimmy Garoppolo, he's feeling much better, and I'm feeling pretty good as well, Evan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I know, look, there's a lot going on in the Bay Area sports scene right now. The appearance of an Aaron Judge signing, all for naught. And as well as some Warriors news, they're kind of taking some ups and downs. But right now, the 49ers are also in that like wait and see kind of, I guess, situation or scenario right now because you're riding high off of Brock Purdy's first unofficial, I guess, win. Technically goes to Jimmy Garoppolo.
True.
But Jimmy Garoppolo arguably got a bigger victory this week when he found out that he did not have to have foot surgery. The fear, of course, was it was a Liz Frank injury, which would have held him out for the entirety of the season. Now, with that 7 to 8 week window, Marc, as you tweeted out earlier, it means he would not, Jimmy Garoppolo, that being, would not be available for the rest of the regular season, but could potentially return in, I think it's like the last week of January, right? That would be the timing of that 7th week, which would come out to be about the divisional round or the conference championship. So that's what everyone is kind of talking about right now. Like, well, first, obviously, you got to get there. But, I mean, how did you take it when you heard the news, aside from, hey, I'm happy for Jimmy because at least he's not going to have to get surgery?
Yeah, I think that was my first thought. Well, first of all, you hear, doesn't need surgery or anything. All right, what's the time frame? And then you see 7 to 8 weeks, you bring out your calendar app on your iPhone and you kind of, count the number of weeks and figure out when he might be coming back. And you see, as you mentioned, 7 weeks, basically exactly from when he got injured on Sunday of this past week, is the final day of the divisional round. Because the divisional rounds you play on Saturday and on Sunday throughout the entire NFL. Obviously, a single team isn't playing on both those days, but there's a chance that you could be playing on a Saturday as opposed to a Sunday. So 7 weeks basically puts him right at the divisional round. The Niners very likely will not be the 1 seed, which means they will have to play and win a wild card game to get to the divisional round for a chance that Jimmy Garoppolo could play. But again, 7 to 8 weeks, that 7-week number is probably looking on the optimistic side of things. And even then, it's relatively unlikely, at least right now, that he would be ready to play in a divisional round game. So that means, let's just assume he's unavailable for a hypothetical divisional round game. That means maybe his first game available would be an NFC championship game, which is a week after that, which would put him 8 weeks out from the injury. Okay, let's think about that. If the Niners were to get to the NFC championship game, they would need to win 2 playoff games, a wild card round and a divisional round to get to the NFC championship game. Who's the starting quarterback in those games? Brock Purdy. Is Brock Purdy playing well enough? We're assuming. Most likely. Things can change. Things have changed a lot this season. Most likely Brock Purdy. If you win those games, logic would suggest Brock Purdy played well enough to help you win. At least he didn't cost you wins in those games. Let's say Jimmy Garoppolo is ready to go. NFC Championship game on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles. Brock Purdy is coming off 2 wins. Do you even start Jimmy Garoppolo at that point? I mean, that's where my mind went to. This is fantastic news. We talked a lot the last couple of episodes, or last episode, how bad we feel for Jimmy Garoppolo. His career, it seemed like, had finally kind of been turning. He'd been changing the narrative around his career with his last 6 games, Evan. So you're extremely happy for him that he avoided a major, major injury. But in my mind, this doesn't change all that much for the 49ers, because if they get to a point where he is available and ready to play, do they even make that change at that point, considering getting that far probably means the team, as constructed without Jimmy Garoppolo, is playing pretty good football?
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, I think that there's obviously a lot of what ifs surrounding this scenario. But I also know that if, let's say, everything goes according to plan and Jimmy Garoppolo gets cleared, essentially, for that division championship round scenario, I okay. So Jimmy Garoppolo does not have the greatest track record in the playoffs. This is understood. Uh, we don't know what Brock Purdy is or is not. We've seen him play one good game, serviceable game against a good opponent. I don't want to dismiss the Miami Dolphins. I don't think they're as good as maybe other people do, but I think they're pretty good. Brock Purdy, if he helps you get a playoff win or two, some might say, well, ride the hot hand. Like, he deserves to have the chance to win or, lose the season. To me, Mark, this may sound asinine to people. This may sound stupid to both Jimmy Garoppolo haters as well as Jimmy Garoppolo fans. But if
Uh-oh.
there is a chance for him to play in the conference championship and he is 100% cleared, to me, there is a no-brainer decision that you go to Jimmy Garoppolo in that game.
I don't know about that. I mean,
And the
so
reason
there's
being, when you're in the playoffs and if you're going on the road, which Brock Purdy would probably have to do once if this whole hypothetical plays out, to me, the one thing that you cannot account for is experience. And I'm sorry. I know there might be physical limitations for Jimmy Garoppolo, so that's all even. It obviously depends on how Brock Purdy plays the rest of this season. I hope he does well. I don't personally, history is not on his side, but for a rookie quarterback to lead you to a Super Bowl, a third string quarterback to lead you to a Super Bowl, a seventh round pick to lead you to a Super Bowl, that generally does not happen. And the reason being because there's no experience. There's no way that you can be in that scenario just by de facto of being in that city. Like, I'm sorry, I would go to Jimmy Garoppolo.
I understand your point. However, I disagree. I mean, not necessarily. I think obviously this whole conversation depends on the context of the situation, and we're trying to, handicap this 8 weeks out, and we just frankly have really no clue how this situation is going to play out. Let's say, for example, that the 49ers somehow barely survive. Say they get the Giants in the wild card round and they barely survive against the Giants. Brock Purdy throws 2 interceptions. One of them goes for a pick six. He also loses a fumble. It's a fantastic Niner defensive performance. Maybe the defense scores a touchdown as well, and they eke out a win despite Brock Purdy's terrible play. Similar story potentially in a divisional round, or maybe you push Jimmy to come back in that divisional round. Obviously, in a situation like that, the conversation changes. But let's say Brock Purdy is serviceable, doesn't turn the ball over, but isn't throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Say he throws for 195 yards, 1 touchdown, doesn't turn the ball over. Niners win by 7 points. At what point is his performance good enough to where you feel comfortable with him moving forward? Because the other part of this conversation is, sure, Jimmy's cleared. The doctors say he's ready for football once again. He can practice. He can get ready for games. He can play in games. But do you remember the conversation early this year around Jimmy Garoppolo after that loss, week 3 in Denver? It's going to take me some time to kind of get back into the offense, to get used to things once again. And I know we had those kind of infamous comments now after week 2 saying, oh, it's like riding the bike. But then just a week later, he kind of went back on his word there and said it takes time to get used to things once again.
Definitely.
Are you going to trust a quarterback who, had already said it takes a little bit to get used to things once again after not playing at all for 2 months? Like, that is also a factor here. It's not just ability and are you physically able to go out and play in a football game again, but it's also, are you rusty and are you as sharp as you need to be to make you potentially better than a rookie in Brock Purdy? That's also part of the conversation.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because I think that's the first place a lot of people's mind go is, well, hey, he clearly wasn't ready at the beginning of the season, right?
Yeah,
But that also is in my mind a different situation because
that's fair.
number one, he's coming off of shoulder surgery, which he admitted shortened his off season, did not have a chance to practice, did not get a full training camp. So the first month of the season, despite what he looked like against the Seattle Seahawks, was essentially his training camp. He also mentioned Kyle Shanahan's playbook being a little bit different than before. Now I know it's all the same, but to me, the experience part I'm not worried about, or him getting revved up and back into the flow of things. I think there's naturally going to be some rust, but I'm not worried about him reverting back to Denver based off of, again, the amount of things that he had to overcome this offseason and at the beginning of the season heading. I mean, he didn't know he was going to be a 49er until after the preseason had ended. So he wasn't practicing regularly with the team as he's been. And also, I'm assuming, this is an assumption, but I'm assuming that if he is cleared 100% to play, he will have had at least a week's worth of practice being back with the first team. And that to me is where hopefully that rust can fade away. Rust, not Russ. Rust can fade away. Um, Although Wilson's done that this season. But
He's
that's to
all
me
the way
why
gone.
he's all the way gone. That's to me why I would be less worried about, I guess, what you're talking about there and the sort of, you know, ramping up to getting back to playing than some people would assume.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting situation because there's so many so many different factors that you have to consider in a moment like this. And again, uh the situation that we're discussing now, I mean there's a good chance it's entirely different when the time comes. And even if the time
Yeah.
comes, I mean there's a very good chance that a Brock Purdy led 49er team, even at home in a playoff game against, say, a team like the Giants, to continue with that hypothetical, they could lose that game. I mean, who knows? Maybe they fall apart here at the end of the regular season. Maybe this, three-quarter performance by Brock Purdy is the best he'll ever look in a 49er uniform. And maybe they don't even win the division. Who knows? There's still a lot of things that can happen at this point. But ultimately, we're in agreement on this. It was fantastic news for the 49ers that they got on Tuesday about Jimmy Garoppolo, because what your original thought was once he went down with the injury, and you could kind of hear it in the way everyone spoke after the win against the Dolphins on Sunday. I mean, Kyle Shanahan just emotional once again. We heard him the same way when Trey Lance went down. We've heard him a lot when he's lost a number of key players. I mean, Christian McCaffrey, who's been in the locker room for a little more than a month now, talking about, I haven't been around very often, but I love Jimmy Garoppolo. And he even credited Brock Purdy's success to Jimmy Garoppolo. It's very, very clear how beaten down this 49er locker room felt. And we kind of talked about the dueling emotions, feeling great about a big win against Miami, but also feeling terrible for your fallen brother, Jimmy Garoppolo. There's no doubt that this news, whether or not Jimmy Garoppolo plays another down for the 49ers this year, and we can leave next year, later, don't need to worry about that now. Whether or not Jimmy Garoppolo plays again for the 49ers this season, Evan, for me, it's not even that important, because I think this news that there's a chance he can come back, that it's not a season-ending injury, that it's not going to be something that costs him any part of next season. It's fantastic for the 49er locker room because it is so incredibly clear how much they love this guy. Just this news alone, even if he does not come back out onto the field, I think is enough to boost the spirits of the 49ers locker room, and that alone could be enough to help them play better down the rest of the season.